So thank you very much for being here this evening. As I just said in Irish, you're all very welcome to this commemoration of the Great Famine. I always use Irish at the beginning of my speeches because I feel that people who are descended from Irish immigrants, in many cases, that includes people in this room, I guess, should also be able to hear the language that their ancestors came here with in many, many cases, because most of the immigrants came from the west of Ireland. That's where the Irish language was most strongly represented at that time in the 19th century. So thank you for coming. It's great to be here. It's great to have you all here for this the Great Famine Voices Roadshow, and I want to thank the people from our National Famine Museum in Strokestown Park for coming here and for including the embassy on their itinerary, which will take them to various parts of North America between now and the middle of the year. And it's always great to have this group here in the United States, because they help to keep the memory of the Great Famine alive among Irish Americans, many of whom were descended from famine immigrants who came here in conditions of great stress and strife, and who became part of the fabric of today's America. Also want to welcome President Mulhall from Quinnipiac University and those who are involved with the Hunger Institute and the Great Hunger Museum at Quinnipiac, a place I visited last year and enjoyed going to, and very fond of and admire greatly the work that's been done up there by Christine Keneally and her colleagues at the Great Hunger Museum. I look forward also to hearing from Professor Tyler Anlinder of George Washington University. So look, why does an Irish embassy in 2019 involve itself in an event to do with something that happened 180 years ago now, 170 years ago? Well, the reason is that, for me anyway, I'm an Irish historian by training and by inclination, and for me, the Great Famine is the indispensable event in modern Irish history. It's the event that really, for me at least, shaped Ireland, and nothing else affected Ireland the way that the Great Famine did. So this was the most dramatic event in Irish history, the most tragic, the most awesomely destructive event in modern Irish history. It was one of the decisive and most tragic events of the history of 19th century Western Europe. Of course, there were other events that occurred and so forth, but the famine really stands out as the last great hunger experience for people in our part of Europe outside of wartime, right? Now, I'm not one for getting into blame games and for allocating responsibility or trying to find words to describe the famine. I think it's enough to say that somewhere around 1 million people died during the famine years, and another 1 million emigrated, and it was a demographic catastrophe for Ireland, really. I mean, the very fact that today the population of Ireland is significantly lower than it was in 1845 tells you all you need to know about the demographic, the devastating demographic impact of the Great Famine. And it started a tradition of emigration that really continues to the present day. Because even though Ireland has now become a nation of immigrants, we're also a nation of emigrants. Because remarkably, today, 17% of the population of Ireland was born outside the Irish state. So 1 in 6 people living in Ireland today was not born in Ireland. But 17%, it's a remarkable coincidence, of all the Irish people, all the people born in Ireland who are living today, 17% of those live outside of Ireland. So you can see that we are actually in an absolute equilibrium in terms of being a nation of emigrants and immigrants. Now that may change. I dare say immigration will probably continue to decline in Ireland as the country becomes more prosperous. But nonetheless, there is a tradition of emigration, and people emigrate for reasons today that are different from the ones that drove their ancestors out of Ireland 150, 200 years ago. They now emigrate for reasons of looking for opportunity, adventure, looking for something different. And in many cases, they try to come back to Ireland once they've settled, once they've spent some years living abroad. They always have this desire to come home. And these days, whereas the people who came to America in the 19th century, going home was really not an option. Today, of course, people can aspire going back to Ireland, and many people do return to Ireland after a certain number of years abroad. And that's the way it should be, and that's the way in which I think is beneficial from an Irish point of view. So, the demographic impact of the famine was devastating. And it set in train generations of mass emigration, and the residue of that is still to be felt today in the propensity of Irish people to emigrate. But not only that, but I think the political impact of the Great Famine was enormous also. In that, I'm not sure every historian would agree with this, but certainly my view is that the famine sounded the death knell for the union between Britain and Ireland. And as I say, I'm not in the business of trying to allocate blame or to describe the famine in any particular way. I don't think any adjective really can be used accurately to summarize it. And you know, some people talk about it as genocide. I don't talk in those terms, but I simply say that the famine fatally undermined the willingness of the majority of Irish people to be ruled from abroad, and that the grievance that the famine left behind fueled generations of Irish people in their resentment against British rule. Now, I'm not saying that an Irish government, a government located in Dublin, would necessarily have been able to prevent the famine. That's, I think, a matter one could debate. But I certainly think it would have been obliged to make a much bigger effort because of the proximity of what was happening in the famine to those who would have been, say, running Ireland from Dublin. In London, they were that bit further away, and therefore I don't think that the urge was quite as strong to take the kind of action that would have been required. And as I say, I'm not even saying that a native government would have been able to cope, because there's plenty of examples of governments of particular countries failing to cope with catastrophes of this scale. But what I am saying is, in my view at least, the famine fatally undermined the Union, and it took another 70 years, because of course the Union was a union between Ireland, a rather weak country which became weaker because of the famine, because the population declined, and because so many people emigrated, and a very strong country in Britain in the 19th century was, after all, the most powerful country in the world, and therefore breaking that union was a very difficult proposition indeed, and it took generations and a new century and a new environment to enable Irish nationals to secure Irish independence finally in 1922, following a war of independence. But the third, apart from the demographic and the political consequences, the third consequence is the consequence that led to the creation of a global Irish community. And there's no doubt about that. The famine is the foundation stone of Irish America. It's a terrible stone, it's a terrible tragedy, but it did create a community in this country that was both cohesively Irish and continued to retain its Irish identity down the generations, but also strongly embedded in the United States and in the culture and politics of this country. So the Irish, when they came, they quickly became involved in local political activity, because many of them, of course, had been politicised. Because remember, the Irish who came to America in the 1840s and 50s and 60s, they came from a country where people had been mobilised by Daniel O'Connell in the 1820s to secure Catholic emancipation, and again in the 1840s in the failed attempt to secure the repeal of the Union. So they were politicised people, and naturally when they came to America, they found their way into politics pretty quickly, and they became part of the fabric of American life and American public life. And the story went on, of course, down the generations to the present day, when there's so many Irish Americans currently members of Congress and so forth. So it is the foundation of this incredible resource that Ireland has today, of a community around the world of some 70 million who identify with Ireland, and 35 million of those are in the United States. And they're a huge resource for our country. And we're a much more significant country in world affairs than we would be if we simply had the 5 million who are living in our state. The fact that we have a community of people around the world of an affinity with Ireland, an affiliation with Ireland, and an admiration for Ireland enormously helps us. And in recent weeks we've seen congressmen and senators here in the United States speaking out on behalf of Ireland and saying that they will stand behind Ireland. They will not allow anything to be done in UK-US relations which might serve to damage the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement on account of Brexit. So Irish Americans are standing in the breach and saying, warning both the American administration and also the British government that they can't rely on being able to get a trade deal through if that trade deal is seen to damage the peace process and to create problems on the border of the island of Ireland. And then a final point I would make, and this is important, is that the experience of the famine has shaped modern Ireland in so many ways. And a big focal point of our Irish aid programme, which last year spent about 750 million euros on development aid around the world. And we have an ambition to double that amount, and by 2030 we expect, all going well, that we will have an aid programme of a value between 2.5 and 3 billion euros. It will be a major aid programme, and one of the big focal points of that aid programme is combating hunger. So the Irish famine experience has been transferred down the generations, and it affects Irish public policy today, and it affects the willingness of people in Ireland to support the aid programme. Even during our crisis of 10 years ago, when the country got into serious economic difficulties, nobody in Ireland started to raise a cry, stop giving money to all these countries in Africa. We need it for ourselves. Even though we were borrowing money from the IMF and the EU, and part of that money was going into our development aid programme. But the reason why there was support for that programme in Ireland was because people have a folk memory of the famine. We realised that there's a reason for making these contributions to global advancement, to the global environment where so many people today still suffer from the hunger in the way that Irish people did in the famine years. So thank you very much for being here. I'm sorry for going on so long, but I just wanted to give you my own appreciation of the continuing significance of the famine, both as a creator of modern Ireland in negative and positive ways, but also a creator of Irish America and a creator of contemporary attitudes in Ireland which support the focus on hunger in our increasing aid programme, Irish Aid. So thank you very much for your attention.